Want to welcome viewers to our regularly scheduled Johnson City Board of Commissioners Commission meeting for this Thursday, February the 4th of 2021. This meeting is being held at 6 p.m. electronically by Zoom pursuant to Governor Lee's Executive Order number 71. As a part of that Executive Order 71, we need to call the roll. And so, Mr. Peterson, would you, or Ms. Jennings rather, will you call our roll? Sorry.
Commissioner Brock,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy,
Here.
Vice Mayor Fowler,
Here.
and Mayor Wise.
Here. And we are fortunate to have with us the Reverend Lattany to bring our invocation. And so with that, I'll invite him to lead our prayer.
Let us go to God in prayer. Most holy and all-wise God, our Heavenly Father, we thank you for another beautiful day that you have blessed us to see. We thank you for your goodness, God, your kindness, and your tender mercy. We pray, God, that you would remind each and every one of us that you are the one who ordained government, that it might be a blessing to those who are being governed, and that you might lead and guide those who are doing the governing. We pray, God, that you would bless all of the citizens of the city of Johnson City, that you would provide every need and that you would continue to do what you do in such a mighty way. You make a way. We pray, God, that you would bless the deliberations of this meeting on this hour, that everything would be done in accordance with your holy will and your holy plan. Guide our hearts, our minds, and our spirits, and help us to always remember that you are indeed a mighty, gracious, and a loving God who keeps taking care of his children. Bless and keep each and every one of us in your divine care. For it's in Christ's precious name that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Lattany.
God bless you, sir.
Now we'll have our pledge. If folks want to stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And Mr. Peterson, there are two items that we might want to modify in our agenda. Perhaps if we could move the West Walnut Street presentation just ahead of consent agenda. So that the LDA representative can do their thing. And then I would like to add an item under other business following up on the Louderback report. And I think we could probably just make that like 8.4. I guess it would still be, make it 8.5 if that's all right. Are we good there, Mr. Peterson?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Do you want to go ahead and call our first item of business?
First order of business is consider approval of the minutes of your meeting, special work session held on Thursday, January 21st.
I would move for approval.
A second.
We have a motion and a second. Ready to call the roll, Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Brock,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Mayor Wise.
Yes.
Your next business is consideration of the minutes from your regularly scheduled city commission meeting held on Thursday, January 21st.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Ms. Jennings, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Brock,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Mayor Wise.
Yes.
At this time, I'd like to call on Phil Penzola to introduce the item, which will be the presentation update on the West Walnut Street project. And he has Reverend Robertson from LDA that I think is going to make the presentation. So Phil, if you would make the introduction, please.
Thanks, Pete, and Commission. I think everybody can hear me. We're about ready to advertise for the construction of West Walnut Street, but we wanted you to have an opportunity to look at what's being designed. And if you have any modifications, we need to know now, because we're hoping to advertise by the end of this month. So I have two individuals from LDA who will make the presentation. The first is Reuben Robertson, and the second is Jason Elliott. So Reuben, I'm handing it off to you.
Thank you, Phil. I'm the project manager here with LDA for the West Walnut Street redevelopment project. And as you all are probably aware, this project is a multidiscipline. It's a streetscape, stormwater, water and sewer project, and it's planned for the West Walnut Street corridor between Buffalo and University Parkway. The purple on the map shows the general area of the limits of construction, with the green being green space, planned green space. West Walnut Street and Ash will be fully reconstructed with this new design, and work on the north to south streets leading into the tree streets it generally end at Maple, and it consists of creating new utility, water, sewer, and storm, and repaving. So that's the extent of the work going into the tree streets. Planned work on University Parkway includes signal and intersection reconfiguration and travel lane resurfacing. We began work on this project around March of 2019, and through city workshops and public input, we've submitted a 90% design for the city to review. And tonight, we just, like Phil said, we just wanted to walk through the project with you all, and we'll go over the design, the schedule, and estimated construction costs. So with that, I'm going to introduce our lead engineer on the project, Jason Elliott.
Good evening, everybody. Reuben, please go to the next slide. Okay. The main purpose of this presentation is to give you an overall summary of the project, but even more than that, we would like to hear your questions or concerns. So as I'm going through these slides, they'll go fairly quickly, but please stop, interrupt if you want to focus on a certain area or have a particular question about any part of the project. So we're going to proceed from west to east, starting at University Parkway. At the left side of this slide is the eastern edge of the ETSU campus. And let me just explain to you the coloring on here. The blue that you see is intentional. That is to try and match ETSU blue, and that blue represents the bike lanes on the project. The brown or reddish brown is pavers, and those areas are either an on-street parking area or a crosswalk or a raised median area. The dark gray is concrete sidewalk. And in between those dark gray patches, you'll see kind of a white patterned area. Those are just concrete driveways leading to businesses or residences. And then, of course, the green is either a grassed or landscaped area. In the inset towards the bottom of the page, Ruben, could you maybe zoom in a little bit on that? This is the new cross section for the road, and this is cut as if you were standing with your back to the campus, looking east towards Buffalo. So going from right to left or south to north, we have sidewalks on both sides. And then we've got our two travel lanes, which have the black top asphalt there. And then to the left of that is the on-street parking area, which is a paver surface, concrete paver. Keep going left, that is the raised median I referenced a few minutes ago. That separates the bike traffic from the vehicle traffic, that raised median. And then you've got your 8 foot of bike lanes, which is 2 lanes, 4 foot in each direction. And then a curb separating the bike lanes from the north sidewalk. Okay, next slide. So here we're heading east. We're at the Cherokee Street intersection, and the large green area you see to the north there between Walnut Street and State of Franklin, that envelops what we are calling a future Cherokee Street extension, which at this time is not part of this project, but we wanted to at least show you the concept of how Cherokee Street may connect to State of Franklin in the near future and provide another outlet for traffic on West Walnut Street. And I'll get back to the need for that outlet when we talk about the changes to University Parkway on a later slide. The green space is conceptually being planned for some stormwater detention pond areas and also some park areas. But again, that is not part of this project at this time. Next slide. So here we're coming up on the Boyd Street intersection, the 2 insets. I don't know how well you can see the coloring in those, but those are the 2 colors that are proposed for the pavers on the project. The one on top is a brown combination that will be used in the on-street parking, the raised median, and the crosswalks. And again, that's represented by kind of that reddish brown color on the plan view. The one towards the bottom is a gray mix of pavers, and that will be used in the interior of the intersection, like you see there on the right side, the Boyd Street intersection. And all of these intersections on the Walnut Street corridor will be raised slightly, a 4-inch height above the surrounding roadways. And the purpose of that is traffic calming, to slow vehicle traffic on Walnut Street as they approach these intersections. Because we have crosswalks, we have bicycles crossing. We just want to calm that traffic down to make the intersection as safe as possible. Okay, next slide. So here we're at Watauga and the Southwest Avenue intersections. What you see there at Watauga, that shift in the roadway, is what's called the chicane. And all that really is a series of reverse curves with a horizontal shift in the center line. And there's kind of a blow up of it there in the inset that shows how it shifts one way or the other. And this is another traffic calming measure that was decided early on to use for this corridor. Next slide. And again, please stop me if you have a question about any of these features or the things in the insets. So here we're at Sevier Street, and you can see the beginning of the Ash Street streetscape, which is going to be all the same materials and aesthetics as the Walnut Street streetscape. And we're doing all of Ash Street from Sevier to Buffalo. So there are 3 of these, the chicanes that I mentioned in the earlier slide. This is the 3rd and last one here at Sevier Street. The 2 insets towards the top left show the lighting scheme that's being proposed for the Walnut Street corridor. And the idea for this was taken from historical railroad station photos like you see in that color rendering there, and applied to, modern, what's available now, materials and supplies that are available now. And the detail below that is actually the detail that will be shown in the construction plans for the taller roadway fixture on the right, and then the smaller pedestrian fixture, which will be backed by the sidewalks on the left there. Next slide. Okay, this slide focuses on the Ernest Street area towards the right, which you see represented by quite a bit of green and brown and gray. And so this section of Ernest Street between Walnut and Ash is being converted from a roadway to what we call a linear park. So you'll have green space in there. The red and the light gray are the 2 different color pavers. There will be site furniture, and that's what you see in those 2 insets. On the bottom are the style of bench that's being used. And on the inset above that is the bike racks and the trash receptacles. And these amenities are not just being installed in the park, but throughout the entire corridor. Next slide. So this is the east end of the project at Buffalo Street. That's a signalized intersection, Buffalo and Walnut. And what we're proposing there is to just use the same type of pavers, the same design as the rest of the intersections down the corridor. You could see the bike lane, the blue ends. So that's where the bike lane will drop off. And they'll need to use other facilities beyond there for bicycling. The inset on the right shows the sign configuration.
Jason, can I interrupt for just a minute?
Sure.
The bike lane at the end there at Buffalo, doesn't the Tweetsie Trail have a spur at Ash or Cherry? Because I think there is bike connectivity within a block or so of this, isn't there?
The idea was to actually extend a bike lane from what's in front of the businesses at Cherry Street parking lot. We put that crossing in, or redid that street. And our plan was to extend that down to Buffalo.
Okay.
We have not gotten to that yet. So what somebody on a bike would have to move from Cherry Street up to this location, or they can use the bike trail that's along State of Franklin Road.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Phil. And one thing I forgot to clarify on the Ernest Street slide that showed that park, that'd be great if you could go back. Perfect. That provides connection to that trail that runs parallel to State of Franklin. And so there's some connectivity there for bicycles and pedestrians. Okay, you'd go back to that other slide. Okay, so the inset on the right side of the slide, again, shows the signing, the roadway signing that's being proposed, and it consists of a black decorative pole with black frames for the panels. It's looked really nice through the corridor. Next slide. And this is my last slide. We're kind of jumping back to the west to University Parkway. Again, the campus is on the left edge of the sheet. But I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about what we're doing with University Parkway and the closure of the intersection, or partial closure, I should say, of the intersection at Walnut and University. There has been a history, and I'll do this quickly, history of crashes at that location because of traffic queuing up that wants to turn left. So the State of Franklin intersection is so close to Walnut that vehicles wanting to turn left are queuing up into the other intersections. So what was decided on over kind of a long process was, and this was through public meetings, et cetera, to construct this 3-foot raised median down the center of University, which would close off that intersection to left turning traffic. So those would be right in, right out only movements. What this allows for is extension of the dual left turn lane you see there that's turning onto State of Franklin westbound. It increases the left turn lane length from 100 feet to 400 feet. So there will be plenty of stores there now, even looking into the future with the future development for those left turn movements. So it'll reduce that congestion. There was a concern voiced at our December 2019 meeting by the residents of the Tree Streets about this causing cut-through traffic down Maple Street. And so the solution we came up with, and this was also voted on at one of our public meetings, was to extend that raised median, the green area you see there, down to actually beyond Maple. It's not really shown correctly there. It's going to go beyond Maple a little bit to prevent people cutting through down Maple and turning left onto University. And the inset there is a photo of exiting Maple, looking west, and you could see the traffic backed up there. And right now there's a left turn lane and a right turn lane. And we'll be eliminating that left turn there.
We'll also be signalizing Pine Street. And so I don't know if you've got a slide for that, Jason, but we are designing it and then we'll hand it off. That'll be part of the contract. We've talked to ETSU about their master plan. It works well with their master plan. And that way we're simply moving the signal from the West Walnut to Pine Street. That gives 2 pedestrian access ways across University Parkway to relieve the concerns of the residents.
Right, and I apologize, I don't have a slide of Pine Street.
Yeah, we're fine.
Phil, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time. Your audio is not real clear. Where did you say the signal will be moved to?
Pine Street.
Pine Street, okay.
So that puts it right in essentially the middle of their master plan for the renovation or complete renovation of their campus. So we talked with them, showed them the plans, they're good to go. And so a student or people who want to access the corridor for whether there's residential on that side or they want to go to restaurants or what have you, they can access across University Parkway at both State of Franklin and Pine Street.
Okay. So traffic, if an automobile was on University Parkway heading southeast, and they wanted to go to McDonald's, and they didn't stay on State of Franklin, they're on University Parkway, they would come up and turn left at a signal at Pine.
No, if you're heading south on University Parkway, you would, and you wanted to go to McDonald's, you obviously can't with the raised intersection. So you would have to access into the neighborhood. Well, that's the purpose behind extending Cherokee Street through the Harmon property, so that it is convenient enough to where they can then access McDonald's. You can kind of see on this, it's not that far away from.
Right. But unless we did Cherokee, they would be basically turning left on Pine. And I guess my follow-up question is, with all these changes on University Parkway with Maple and Pine, have you estimated how much additional traffic might be rerouted into the tree streets?
There was a study done, Jason or Ruben, about the movement of traffic. Essentially, we don't believe that people accessing into that commercial district will go through a neighborhood to access. The concern of the residents was whether they would access to Maple Street to get out from the commercial section. And we agreed that obviously it's hard to project, but we did believe that in fact that would be a problem. So we said, okay, how do we remedy the issue with Maple Street? What you're suggesting is somebody making essentially a right turn onto University Parkway from State of Franklin, then they can't get to McDonald's, so they'd have to go up into the neighborhood.
Right.
What we believe after the first or second time they do something like that they simply would choose the least disruptive route, which would be the Cherokee extension.
Okay.
We never said that we would close off anything if we didn't extend Cherokee. So now we're in a position to extend Cherokee when the near the end of the project.
So yeah,
those
final
people-
question. It's right in, right out on Walnut Street at University Parkway. Right in, right out.
Correct.
And is it right out on Maple, or can you turn left there on Maple? You said you were going to run
You
that.
cannot turn left from Maple on.
But Maple is only right out then.
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. I've got my questions answered. Thank you.
Yeah, those people that want to get to the south end either have to go up to Locust, which is tough, or they circulate around and get on the State of Franklin via.
Or go down to Buffalo. Go down to Buffalo. Yeah.
Or go down to Buffalo. And so we actually looked at all the traffic movements. This one was the most suspect as to whether or not they would utilize the neighborhood streets. We didn't detect that they are using it today on the other end of the project.
Hey, Phil?
Yeah.
Do you think that people on University Parkway going south, wouldn't they go on down to Pine Street and try and just U-turn back on University to get to McDonald's?
Yes. They do that in other locations where we really try to discourage that movement. That's a tough movement, but that's the way people are going to act. Once they figure out, once the road system's completely in, they go to the path of least resistance. So they would not choose to go south on University Parkway to repetitively enter the neighborhood to access any of the properties. They would choose to go to Cherokee or Watauga or Sevier. After the first or second.
They probably would not go into the tree streets. They'd rather just U-turn on University because that's the path of least resistance if they can do that.
Especially since we've got a traffic signal there now.
There would be one at Pine Street. Would they make that turn? That one, you might get a couple. We just do not see that being a major movement. We think they'll adjust their movements.
I think
After they do it the
second
first-
time, that's what they would do, but they wouldn't keep going that way.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
That's been the general experience now. I mean, you see it happen on Bristol Highway, and that's really the only way they can get around. But here, there are other options.
Any other questions on any of the slides that have been presented up to this point?
No, sir.
Okay, well, I'm going to turn it back to Ruben. He's going to go over the project construction schedule and budget.
Thank you, Jason. So we are trying to advertise this project for bid. We have the 90% plans in to water and sewer and public works for review for the next 2 weeks. So we're shooting for March 1st advertise, and we'll open bids the beginning of April and award the project. It would be the first commission meeting in May. So that puts us on track to begin construction the 1st of June, and it'll be a 24-month final completion, which would be June of 23.
I'm sure y'all have a plan on how it's going to be done, but it would be good at some point in time to come back at a public commission meeting and just talk about how the workflow will take place and the
Commissioner,
disruption.
that's an easy one. Starting on the east side, and we're going block by block. So if they have to close something or temporarily disrupt it, because there's so much work in the street, and you pretty much have to rip the street out. And so we'll go block by block.
Okay, thank you.
And there is a phasing plan that's part of the construction documents that essentially splits the project geographically into 4 major phases going from east to west. So that is part of the plan set for the contractor.
And y'all have had meetings with all the businesses up through there to go through the plans and how the work's going to take place.
We've had how many public meetings, Phil? I was at 2.
We're going to start reaching out to the individual business owners during this month to start discussing the final version of the project with them.
Yeah, we still have elements of the project that impact the properties. So they have to go back and talk generally with every property for electrical service, cable, whatever. And so at that time, we'll talk about the sequencing of the project and that sort of thing as we go through how we're going to build this. So we will be essentially talking to everybody.
The estimated construction cost for the 90% set of plans breaks down like this. So we have water and sewer at $8 million, the stormwater utility portion at $1.5 million, and the general fund at $15.5 million. And that adds up to $25 million. Under the general fund is the streetscape portions, the streetscape furniture, landscape and irrigation, the vehicle and pedestrian lighting, and the power relocation. And as we've discussed so far, not included in this project is the Harmon Ice acquisition, the green space or stormwater park development at Harmon Ice, and the Cherokee extension. And there's also plans to extend the center turn lane on West State of Franklin from this intersection of University Parkway back to Watauga. So-
Our crews are planning to put in the turn lane on West State of Franklin. We did all the others, so we didn't see that. It's been a very large job. And the reason the Harmon Ice is, I didn't want to mix up a construction contract on property we don't own yet. So, and they'll have to move. So we thought it'd be better. Let's take our time on that project. We'll do it all at once. And then depending on who's buying adjoining properties, they might have some ideas as to how we construct that holding facility.
So that is the end of our presentation. Happy to answer any questions or address any comments.
Are there questions from the commission? I want to thank you, gentlemen, for the work you've done. It's exciting to see Walnut Street moving one step closer to that vision being realized. So thank you for the update. Are there any questions from the balance of the commission? Thank you. If not, Mr. Peterson, what is up next?
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
One thing I would like to add, one of the purposes of this quarter is to strengthen and emphasize the link between downtown and the university. And the university has moved, I think, alumni and possibly foundation into the model mill. They are in deep discussions about being involved in the Ash Street Courthouse project in terms of locating some of their newly formed corporation there to deal with small business, startup business, student retention, economic development type things. I think it would be appropriate and would really strengthen visually what we're trying to do here physically if we incorporated some of the ETSU branding into what we're doing. Utilization of some of their color palette, perhaps some banners, those types of things to strengthen that tie with the university. I think that would be a very prudent move to emphasize the strength of that relationship and what the university brings into the city. So I would just throw that out there for your all's consideration.
I know Dr. Nolan really likes orange.
In following up what Pete's saying, the word is out in the developing community to change the nature of the business structure along that corridor. We actually have a developer out of Knoxville coming. He heard about it and wanted to see where he could be involved in redeveloping properties. And obviously, the gentleman who's here in town, he's been working with Pete, everybody. So we've got a lot of interest in, as just a note, as properties come available downtown, we're getting them from Greenville, Asheville, and Charleston that I'm aware of, and now Knoxville that I'm aware of, that they are snatching up these properties about as quick as they go on the market, surprisingly. So we actually expect that to happen on Walnut Street. So this is a really good project for Johnson City.
Yeah, Pete, to your comment a minute ago about ETSU and the colors and all, I couldn't agree with you more. So it would be exciting to kind of work with ETSU and Phil's group and everybody working on this project, how that could look.
Thank you, ma'am. Are we ready to move on, Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Your next order of business is consideration of the consent agenda.
Commission, are there items that you wish to see pulled for further discussion? I'll guess we'll go alphabetically. So Commissioner Brock, do you have things to pull?
Just one, the budget amendment 5.1.4.
5.1.4. All right. Commissioner Hunter.
No, I'm good.
All right. Commissioner Murphy.
I'm good for now. Thank you for asking.
All right. And Vice Mayor Fowler.
Nothing for me.
All right. Mr. Peterson, 5.1.4.
And this is just for the public knowledge that we're doing a budget amendment so they can keep up with the financials of the city as well.
Yes, ma'am. The highlight of this budget amendment is several years back, the city commission set forth a desire and didn't actually adopt a policy, but a strong desire and direction to the staff that in recognition of our recruitment and retention challenges, that we really needed to address our pay scale. And we had discussions at that time about should we do a pay study and hire a consultant. And it was the recommendation of Mr. Willis and Mr. Wilson that rather than paying a consultant $60,000, $75,000 to come in and tell us what we already knew, the money would be better spent by just beginning a pay plan adjustment schedule with a desired end result to do 3 consecutive years of 4% per year adjustment, which would get our entry level as well as all of our salaries schedules to increase 4% each year. I think you all are very familiar with where we are with our challenges on recruiting new employees. The improvement, the last 2 adjustments that you made have been very helpful. We're still nowhere close to the top of our competing cities. We're probably stationed nicely somewhere towards the middle. So we're more attractive than we were, but we're not the one that everybody looks to that, hey, I want to go there because they pay really well. So if you will recall, when we adopted this year's fiscal year budget, FY21, was during the midst of the start of the pandemic, and we chose not to implement the 4% pay plan adjustment that had been contemplated and planned for. And we told you that we were going to defer that until after the first of the year, which brings us to now. That allowed us to look at revenues, sales tax collections, property tax collections, those types of things, to make a good determination as to what those revenue streams are doing, and does it look like that the growth patterns will be sustainable going into the future. Mr. Wilson has laid out a nice recap of what our revenue growth has done. We only have sales tax information through the end of November, but year to year, this is not year to budget, this is year to year comparisons. Sales taxes are up 5% from the same period last year. That is currently $480,000. We fully expect that number to be much bigger than the 480 by the time we get to the end of the fiscal year. As far as property tax collections, so far the billings were up by $269,000 over the prior year, and it appears that we are collecting approximately 94% of what's been billed year to date, and that we're projecting an increase in property tax collections this year of $154,000. By the end of the year, we fully expect revenues to exceed budget by several $million dollars. And historically, we only spend about 97% of the approved expenditures. In addition to budgeting revenues extremely conservatively for this fiscal year, we also reduced some operating expenses. And so if we can maintain our typical historical spending levels, year to date, year-to-year comparisons in expenditures should be less than what they were last year. The result of this is revenue and expenditure-wise, we're in much better financial shape than anyone could have ever contemplated 13 months ago when the pandemic started. So what we are recommending is that the City Commission would approve a 4% salary increase for all employees effective with the payroll beginning March the 13th. The reason for that is it will take payroll and HR a couple of weeks to do all the data entry, and we need to coincide that with the start of a pay period. And since our public safety people are paid on a 28-day cycle rather than a 14-day cycle, we need to sync it up with that pay cycle as well. So the cost to the general fund to implement at this point in the fiscal year would be $400,000 for the balance of this fiscal year. I know that was a really quick recap. If you've got any questions or comments, Barbara, I'd be glad to answer those. Or if you'd like to ask Mr. Willis about his thoughts on how this would help with recruitment or retention, he's on the call as well.
Are there questions from the commission? Commissioner
Any
Brock?
comment from Mr. Willis about this?
I'm sorry, Vice Mayor, would you repeat your question?
I just wondered if Mr. Willis has any comments he'd like to make about this.
Certainly, as we looked at this, Commissioner Fowler, we felt like not only did it allow us to align with the plan that we had previously laid out, but I also think it really recognizes the hard work of the men and women here at the City of Johnson City. Throughout this pandemic, you know, our public safety folks, our water sewer folks, our public works folks, really everybody under the umbrella of the city have been working tirelessly through this pandemic. Very little opportunity for folks to work from home in our organization. So we've had boots on the ground out in the public, if you will, in harm's way from a COVID perspective, and they've done a fantastic job. So not only does this allow us to continue with the plan we set forth 3 years ago, but I think it would be greatly appreciated by our employees and really recognize them for the fantastic job they do each and every day.
Thank you. That's what I wanted heard in the public.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Commissioner Brock, did you have any further question?
No, I'm just, like I said, I just wanted the public to hear this, and this is going to be an easy yes vote for me.
All right, Commissioner Hunter. Any questions on that?
No questions. I'm excited that we're able to, you know, continue the plan in light of the pandemic and whatnot. So.
All right. Commissioner Murphy, do you have anything to ask or add?
I think anytime we have an opportunity to take care of our employees more, we need to be open to that. And so I'm glad for this proposal, and looks good.
Thank you very much. With that, I think we've addressed everything that was pulled from the consent agenda. So is there a motion with respect to the consent agenda?
I would move for approval.
We have a motion and a second. All right. We'll call the roll, Ms. Jennings.
Commissioner Brock,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Mayor Wise.
Yes. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, sir. This takes us to ordinance number 4764-21, ready for consideration on first reading. Ordinance number 4764-21, an ordinance to amend the zoning map of the City of Johnson City, Tennessee, being part of the appendix to ordinance number 1519, entitled An Ordinance to Adopt a Code of Laws and Ordinances for the City of Johnson City, Tennessee, and to repeal all laws and ordinances in conflict therewith and amendatory thereof by changing from B3 supporting supporting central business and R5 high-density residential to MX1 mixed-use neighborhood zoning, certain properties along East Maple Street. Ready for your consideration on first reading. And Mr. Mitchell, if you would explain the item, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Ms. Hodges is pulling this up, and then I believe she will run with this particular presentation.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Did I
we
pick
can
the
see
right
your
one?
screen.
Okay.
So you're ready to go ahead and go full screen.
All right. Good evening, commissioners. This is my first time presenting to you guys. My name is Whitney Hodges. I'm the planning consultant for development services, also a native of Johnson City. Today, as we've described, we are looking at 3 properties at the corner of Maple Street and Alabama Street. This is at 701. You already know the local motion cyclery, and the owner of that property, Brian Winston, has purchased 700 and 640 Maple Street and would like to expand the operation of the cyclery to include more storage, some additional showroom space, perhaps like a snack shop, a tap room, an outdoor patio, and also a pump track. And we'll get to what that will look like in just a minute. But kind of a bird's eye view of where the zoning is and where this stands. You'll notice that the properties that are on Maple Street are in a residential area. There is industrial across the street, as well as that red spot is where the local motion is. I didn't mention in the slide before that one of the reasons that this is so popular here is because it's where the Tweetsie Trail head is. And so that makes this nice little addition to a destination. And this slide here just gives you an idea of what this looks like currently. If you haven't had a chance to see the rezoning sign or walk around recently, 640 is a dilapidated building. The applicant is going to tear the building down and rebuild, and we'll get to their elevations and modeling soon as well. Just to kind of show that this is in a place of recreational assets. We've talked about the Tweetsie Trail. You have 3 parks. One is not shown, but you have Cardinal Park, Memorial Park, and then Keystone is just off the map to the right. It's also on a transit stop line. So you've got this area where you have industrial, you have residential, a small amount of commercial coming together to where a mixed use kind of node that's a small scale, let me go back here, small scale resident or small scale commercial development. It's going to be around 2,000 square feet, really focusing on a pedestrian scale, meaning that the focus will be something that is walkable. This concept plan was included with your packet. It's just a rough drawing and kind of gives you an area of what, or a general idea. But they did, Mr. Winston did provide, and if you will allow, I will play a small video that gives a more broad understanding of what he would like to do with the property. And I'm hoping this plays for you guys. But this would be the front of the building, kind of giving you a minute to show, and it also shows the elevation of how that would look along the street. You'll notice the rooftop area, as well as you're starting to see the pump track that's in the back, and then coming back around to street side. That's a little bird's eye view again. Just a little moment to spot there. What I'd like to talk about a little bit is the concerns that staff brought up in the staff report, as well as what was talked about at the planning board or planning commission meeting. So the red circle there is where the rezoning, potential rezoning is. And some of the concerns that we brought up were just making sure that the lighting met the standards of the ordinance so that any kind of light trespass didn't go on to neighbors. Because as this is an area where you're getting, you can see several residential places, there's industrial across the street. It's just a mixture of uses that any kind of change might have some effect on the neighbors. So we wanted to make sure that neighbors were aware. Another issue was with parking. Just being aware of parking. They do meet their parking requirement for the building. So, and they meet that on site, but there is additional parking in the neighborhood. And then another concern that came up was noise. And it was of what that potential pump track might look, what kind of noise that might attract. And I recently visited on a Saturday just to kind of check that out again, to see how, what kind of noises were going on. And it is of staff's opinion that the use would not increase any noise that's already out there. You've got 26, you've got a railroad, you've got construction equipment across the street. So this may not necessarily be a adverse use. Staff recommends approval of the rezoning request. It will need to marry with the mixed use zoning because it is taking advantage of the changes that were presented at first reading. I believe that was on the 21st. And so this will need to come after that. And Planning Commission also recommended approval. Just to note some of the policies out of the bridge plan that the bridge plan supports approval would be the kind of that mixed use node, as well as promoting outdoor recreation. The strategic plan, I wanted to also include, because the commission has worked on that, it does outline quality of place. Well, staff believes that it's probably a city directive of what needs to happen as far as city dollars. This request kind of marries with a public-private partnership of, providing a little bit more to a destination. So I am here for any questions, as well as the applicant is on the phone. One of the things that was brought up in the Planning Commission meeting was that the applicant reach out to the adjoining property owners again. When we spoke on a couple Saturdays ago, I know he has tried to reach out to them. I don't know that he has gotten through to them. He did reach out to the, I think it's called the East Tree Streets Neighborhood Association. And those Facebook posts were included with your package, so that it's kind of one way to do it in these interesting times of COVID, of reaching out to neighbors. So does anybody have any questions or concerns?
Are there questions from Ms. Hodges?
Yeah, as y'all know, I have taken the seat on the Planning Commission. So I was at my first meeting when this was brought up. I didn't vote on it. However, it was with all the other planning commissioners, it was unanimous. But and the reason I didn't that night, I wanted to see more feedback from the neighborhood, and definitely the neighbors on either side of this project. Because it is going to be, quite a different thing wedged in between their two houses. So if Brian's on the call and he has any other input there, that would be good. And then my second question really is just what kind of buffering might be put in to help mitigate the noise that would be there. I think the project's wonderful. I mean, it's just great. But I want to make sure that we take care of our neighbors as well, and that we're doing something that's going to be compatible with, not interrupting their quality of life.
Okay, I might defer to Preston on the buffering per se.
Could you
Preston?
go back, Ms. Hodges? Could you show? Did you have like a map that showed the adjacent zones?
I do.
Okay.
Right there.
Because I would ask the question more specifically, like the property in question, they're both R5, is that correct? Is there a required buffer between an MX1 and an R5 because R5 is so high use in the residential arena?
I may have to defer to Mr. Mitchell on that one.
Okay. Mr. Mitchell?
Forgive me, Mayor. Can you ask that specific question again regarding the buffer?
My recollection is R4 and R5 don't always trigger the buffer the way like an R2 would. And so does MX1 abutting an R5 even trigger a buffer?
It does, based on the change in land use.
Okay.
It does. And so it would either be and I can pull up the code while we're talking or while any other conversation's going on, but just to verify, but I believe it's either 10 or 15 feet. It can reduce to 10 with a fence, but I will verify. I can pull that up.
Okay. Thank you. And another question, the MX1, does it require any kind of site plan or approval? Because it's a budding residential by design, do we retain any influence over future uses of MX1 or future building on MX1?
We would not be able to, through the rezoning process with a concept plan, you cannot limit uses. So the uses within the MX1 would all be permitted. However, as we discussed on the 21st, the proposal for the MX1 is that those uses be what, and obviously this is our recommendation and based on our professional opinion, that the uses allowed within MX1 are compatible with neighborhood edge or neighborhood nodes. Certainly, it's not an area where you're going to be allowed to have gas stations and oil change facilities and those kinds of things. So all the uses with the MX1 would be permitted, but they are typically going to be small scale, maximum 2,000 square feet, general goods and services. So those would be permitted. However, you are correct that there are actually two different steps from a site plan perspective for the MX1. They are required to submit a concept plan, which he's done, and then he's actually gone a little bit above and beyond and had his architect do all those fancy 3D renderings, which can all be made a part of the official record. But then, if this gets approved, he will have to come back in and work with staff to do what's called a comprehensive development plan. And that comprehensive development plan looks at his concept plan and the immediate area to make sure that some of his kind of final details are consistent with what's already out there. What that means is engineering would get involved to see whether or not there's any needs associated with on-street parking, sidewalk widening, sidewalk improvements, crosswalk improvements. That's crosswalks on both East Maple and on Alabama would be something we would recommend. You've got a transit stop there. Would there be an opportunity here to improve the pedestrian access from his bike shop and the potential new development or expansion of the bike shop across the railroad tracks to the Tweedsy trailhead? So that would all be done as part of the comprehensive development plan.
Okay, Mr. Winston, are you on the call?
I don't see him on the call. Ms. Graham, do you have him waiting?
No, we don't.
Okay. And again, second reading is upcoming and would involve public hearings. So I suppose we could make it known that we'd like him to be present for second reading.
Absolutely. But my question was on the neighborhood thing. So what I've been told about the neighborhood meetings hasn't changed anything since the Planning Commission. And I was really hopeful we would have a little bit more information about the neighbors. Mr. Mitchell, do you know anything more?
The additional information we have is what was provided to you in your packet and the social media blast that Mr. Winston did. I know it's always a little awkward to take screenshots from a cell phone and then, convert those to a PDF, but what's in your packet are those screenshots from his cell phone. The other is,
I'm sorry, I forgot that. Yeah.
And so he did the additional outreach between Planning Commission and today. The other is, I believe he went knocking literally door to door because I received a phone call, which I couldn't take that phone message and somehow put it in your packet, but I thought I would bring it up tonight, is that I received a phone call from a neighbor on East Maple who was adjacent to this property, and she indicated her full support and loves the idea of what locomotion can do for the area. So and then I realized that that's one-sided, but I did not also at the same time receive any additional opposition.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor, may I ask a question, please, sir?
Yes, sir.
How are we going to deal with parking here? I know in an ideal world, everybody's going to ride their bicycle and it's only going to be bike riders. But if you've got a place of mercantile and the potential of beverage and food, you're going to have people drive there. And we certainly don't want folks to park at the trailhead and tie up the parking lot at the trailhead if they're not riding the Tweetsie Trail. And the second part of my comment would be on the screen that's up now, one lot is fairly shallow coming off of Maple and one extends up to the backyard of those houses that sit up there on top of the hill. Could you put parking in there? It looked to me like he only had 2 parking places for the development he had proposed.
Now, are you posing
in there, or could you, would it make sense not to rezone the entire depth of that property? Because once MX zoning goes in there, somebody somewhere down the way could put in another use other than what you're seeing today that may be more intrusive into that residential area. Just 2 things I think we need to talk about.
now? You posed that to me because
Mr.
what I'll do, I'll defer to the city manager and he's here to answer those questions.
Mr. Mitchell will handle that question.
Okay, thank you.
I can certainly speak to a little bit of it. With the parking, that hill climbs pretty quickly, so that might be a little problematic to grade up into there. And with what they want to do with the pump track, that might make it a little problematic. As far as the not taking the rezoning line all the way back to the property, they need to, you can't dual zone a property, so it would need to be a separate parcel. And that may be a little, I would have to look at what the street frontage would be, but that also may be slightly problematic.
It would be, we looked at that in preliminary conversations, Mr. Peterson, and because you can't dual zone or split zone a piece of property, he would have to create a new lot, and then it would have to have frontage, like Ms. Hodges said. It would be incredibly difficult to do that. And since he's proposing to use almost all of the lower half of that lot, it would be virtually impossible to create a new lot. He was a part of those conversations the entire time and recognizes, just like what Ms. Hodges says, you have so much topography, it rises so rapidly that it really is not developable above where the adjoining property line has its southwestern property border. It jumps up there pretty quick. But that's a very good question, because we know that when you look at the zoning map, it's going to have a finger there. It will just simply be unused land. Now, one thing we can do is, because his concept plan is focused on simply on the developable portion of his land, we can ask him to identify on his concept plan that all remaining land extending up the hill is undeveloped. What that does is just a note that the uphill portion of the land is undeveloped, locks it up as undeveloped, because then if he or anybody else ever tried to develop the uphill portion, it would be considered a concept plan amendment. It would have to come back before you again.
The concept plans are binding?
The concept plans are binding. And so if he identifies the uphill portion as undeveloped, it would be locked until it got amended by the city commission again.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that the commission had the opportunity to hear that discussion.
Yeah, Pete, I'm glad you did. That was on my list, was parking, and I left it off. There's only 2 additional parking spots there. And all of that parking over there right now is taken up all the time anyway. So I don't think everybody's going to be riding their bike to this establishment. And I don't know where they're going to go. My fear is they'll go over into the Tweetsie Trail parking lot and park there. And that's already, you can't get a spot in there as well. So I hope
then that solves the problem. Anytime I go to the Tweetsie Trail, I'm parked over at the Memorial Park already.
Yeah. Yeah, but it is an issue, and I think they need to keep exploring what he might be able to do. I don't know if there's any space to park on the, I guess, south side of his current building, or can lease some space from OmniSource over there or something. But I do believe parking will be an issue.
We certainly don't disagree with those concerns. One of the things that helps mitigate our concerns is the small square footage of the building. The other is that it's an expansion of his existing facility. So it's if this was a separate independent, and it could be, he could sell it, but if it was a separate independent user, I think that could potentially be a little bit of a different situation. The other is he's not proposing a full service restaurant and bar. What he's proposing is an area there. If you go back, Whitney, to the architectural renderings that were provided, what he's proposing is an area where, mom and dad, when Jack and Will come, and Jack and Will are wanting to ride their BMX bike on the pump track, that Rosie and I can get a beer and watch Jack ride on the pump track. And obviously Mr. Winston needs to say this himself at the public hearing, but that's his intention.
So procedurally, this is a first reading. We would hear it again on second reading at the next meeting, and then third, I guess the first meeting of March. Are there questions for staff on this item, or are you ready to take some action? That's an either or. You can go either way.
Can you go back?
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve it on first reading.
All right.
Second.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And was that a second from the vice mayor?
Yes.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to approve it on first reading. If there's no further discussion, Ms. Jennings, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Brock,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Mayor Wise.
Yes.
Your next order of business is consideration of ordinance number 4755-20. An ordinance to amend Title 8, Chapter 2, Section 209 by amending Section 5, requiring a certificate of substantial completion, and adding Section 6, requiring regulatory distance for location of on-premise beer license to the code of the city of Johnson City, or any other ordinances or parts of ordinances heretofore passed. Ready for your consideration on third and final reading.
Have there been any changes since the first two readings?
No, sir.
All right. Commission, do you have questions or desire to take action?
I would move for approval.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. If there's not objection, we'll call the roll.
Commissioner Brock,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Mayor Wise.
Yes.
At this time, we will hear a presentation on the Child Friendly Cities Initiative by Dr. Wood and Julia Turpin.
Hello, how are you guys? Could I get permission to share my screen?
Yes.
Oh, you got it. Here we go. I'm just going to go up to the, thank you for the opportunity to kind of give an update on where we are. Just going to go up here to the front top and then show that. Can everyone see that? Janet, can everybody see my screen now? Uh-oh.
Yes.
We
I
can,
believe so. Yes.
Thank you. I didn't know if I was being heard. Thanks. So we're just going to give you a quick update on our progress. We're going to review a little bit of the framework and then just, give you an update. Julia Turpin is also with me. Hi, Julia. And we're going to just go through a few slides real quick. And we know you have a long agenda, so we want to make this brief, but we want to be open to any questions you have. Please feel free to interrupt either one of us. Just to remind you that the Child Friendly Cities, the UNICEF program, UNICEF has been the guardian of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Child, which was passed in 1989. All the countries in the world have signed on to it. And it really does acknowledge that children are entitled to and require special care, assistance, and protection because of their dependency status. And really our goal of this project is to ensure the civil, political, and economic and social cultural rights of all children. So we want to make the child-friendly city of Johnson City so that we can ensure the well-being of all children. And the vision here is that the rights will be realized when young children and young people feel safe, heard, nurtured, and are able to flourish. I think everyone can agree that all children deserve that. And we're part of a group of, and Julia was in a meeting today with the other cities, most of whom are much bigger than us, but we found out today that we're making really great progress on our project. So we're very excited about this. We're going to give you just a quick reminder of the process we're going through and just a little bit of what we've been doing. So the Child Friendly Cities is a rights-based approach, and it's holistic. We're using data about our city to drive the project forward, but with partners, both government and community-based partners. And again, I think it's really worth emphasizing over and over again that a unique aspect of this project is to listen to children, elevate their voices, and get their input. Children meaning young children as well as up through adolescence. This is our leadership team and key partners. Me, Julia Turpin, who you know. Sam Pettyjohn is a faculty in the College of Public Health and is in the Center of Rural Health Research, and is really pulling a lot of the data together for us and helping us with surveys. I want to mention Chris Keller, who has joined our team. He's the Dean of the college, Honors College, and is very interested in supporting this project and has become part of our core team. And below there, you see our key partners. Commissioner Brock is representing the commission. Keisha Shun is representing the city, and Kim Hale is representing ETSU. Tim Perry is over Women and Children's Health and Frontier Health. Greg Wallace, Assistant Superintendent, representing Johnson City Schools, and Lisa Carter, representing Ballot Health. She's CEO of Nice One for Children. We've had 2 meetings with this group to get their input and present kind of our plan. So we're actively engaging them in how this is moving forward. I'm really very excited to report, and this that we have already, through Chris Keller's efforts in the Honors College, we put out a kind of a call to honors students, And Chris made available to them the opportunity to be interns, to get a stipend and actually get credit for participating in this project. So just this week, really, we're bringing on 5 students, all of whom are spectacular young people. Most of them are like sophomore juniors at ETSU. And they will be involved in all phases of the project. They're going to be helping us engage youth and adult stakeholders. So if one of them calls you and wants to interview you, please answer them. But they'll be educating us. They'll be learning and then educating all the key stakeholders on the Convention on the Rights of the Child. They'll be helping us design and then implement interactive sessions and one-on-one interviews, as well as surveys. And importantly, they'll be serving as mentors as we stand up a youth advisory committee for this group. And lastly, they'll actually be participating in us analyzing data from existing data sources, and we'll mention those, and as well as interviews and surveys. So they're going to be very involved in the project. This is just the kind of step-by-step process we go through to get preliminary certification as a child-friendly cities. We're in the process of our community and government assessment. Then out of this will come a plan that will present to the commission. We'll prioritize goals, and we have to identify at least one project to move forward. Then as part of an action plan, and have a formal way to get youth input, like a youth advisory committee. And then we'll get tentative, I think it's called tentative, my slides are being blocked.
Candidate status.
Candidate logo. Anyway, the next step is we really take this project for, over the next few years, planning future projects. I'm gonna get my thing here. And then evaluate our progress, and ultimately we'll get final CFCI logo and certification by UNICEF USA. So that's kind of the process. I'm a little problem with my, oops, let me go back up. Julia, you want to talk about, this is another kind of schematic on how the process
Sure. This explains where we are in the process. As Dr. Wood mentioned, where there's sort of parallel things happening at once. And so part of the situation analysis is the government assessment and the community assessments. And so right now we're working toward designing the work plan for the community assessment, which is going to look at safety and inclusion, children's participation, equitable social services, safe living environments, and play and leisure for children in Johnson City. And again, we're pulling together the choices for that right now.
Sorry.
You're fine. And as Dr. Wood mentioned earlier, I had a big UNICEF team meeting today, and I'm really excited because we're on schedule with everyone else. So that's great for us. And this is a very big project. So it's always great to hear that we're in a good place. The choices that we're trying to make right now are the same choices our cohort they're looking at too. So kind of the timeline that we're looking at is to pull together the plan for the community assessment here in the next couple of months. And then in the spring, we should be able to bring some of those data pieces back to the commission for you to look at to help us design then the priorities for the plan. So as you can see, that little circle will show you the community challenges that we want to talk about, and then move forward with group priorities from there sometime in June 2022. And the following year, it'll cycle through. So, okay, so then the next slide you can see is information itself about conducting the situation analysis, what we're going to be looking at. For the government assessment, of course, we're doing a lot of data searching right now, very quantitative. As we move forward with this, and now that we have the students involved from ETSU, they'll be reaching out to staff, users of the city. I'm examining a whole variety of things using resources made available through UNICEF largely. And as we design the community assessment, we're going to be identifying key stakeholders. We have decided to go ahead and focus on, we had to identify 2 target groups within children of our community, and we selected 0 to 5 and then 13 to 18. And the leadership team selected those groups primarily because of the current data that's available. I'm sure you remember the EDI data that's out there about readiness at kindergarten. So that's really 0 to 5 focused. And we knew we wanted to make sure that we were able to fully utilize that data set, which we already had. So we're looking at services to children and families 0 to 5, and then teens. As David mentioned earlier, one of the outcomes that we're hoping to have is a youth advisory board or committee of some sort for the city of Johnson City. So we're going to have a small group of children who help us work through this process. But then later, one of the outcomes will be a separate board that can be of service to city government as you make your choices. And we certainly wanted to make sure we're engaging teenagers as we go through that 13 to 18. David, did you want to add anything from that? Okay. Keep going.
Yeah, this is just a slide of, just to give you a little taste of the data that we'll be looking at. And this, we pulled the data from the census and looking at Johnson City, 55% of homes have at least one child under 18. There's about 4,300 children that are 0 to 5, which is less than a third of all children in the city, but there's about 50% are female and about 15% are minority race or ethnicity. 36% of young families are poor or under the poverty line. So that's quite important. And 65% of families with children 0 to 5 are in single parent households. And there's quite a discrepancy between the poverty rate. So 79% of those are headed by female and 62% of those are poor. Whereas 21% are headed by males and only 12%, 13% are poor. And kind of a, not unique, but a aspect of families in our cities is that 15% of young children are being raised by grandparents. So it's kind of, we just put this data out there just to show you a little bit about how we're going to be profiling our city and looking at the needs of children in our city. Just to give you the progress, we've had 2 meetings with our key partners. We've had multiple meetings with UNICEF, including participating in these cities with the other partner cities, and we're holding our own against these really big cities. We're reviewing and adapting the child-friendly cities planning documents. We're creating a data plan, and that data I gave you was just a little taste. We are developing tools for both participatory sessions, which we hope to hold. We'll have to see how it goes with COVID, but definitely, we actually did one virtual session with children 10 and 11 years of age, and it was really fun. And they gave us some really interesting input. So I think there'll be some very interesting issues coming out. And again, we identified these 2 groups we're focusing on. And the last thing we've accomplished just recently is we got quite a few EDSU students wanting to participate, and we interviewed a bunch and selected the 5 that you saw. And I just can't say enough about them. They're wonderful young people. And I think we do have one person who's bilingual, bicultural in that group, reaching out to our Spanish-speaking families as well. Just one slide. I love this little hand that shows the 5 areas of children's rights: safety, participation, essential services, the right to family life, play and leisure, and children's right to habitat. And on the right, the left column of that table shows just those rights more explained. And on the right shows examples, you can just glance at them, I won't read them, of different kinds of initiatives that cities have taken on to address some of these areas. One of which has been, increasing childcare services or using approaches to reduce or improve attendance, reduce absenteeism in schools. Mental health services is an area. So just to highlight a few things that cities have done to improve or enhance and protect the rights of children in their projects. That's really the overview. Any questions that you have? And this is the mural downtown, but please let us know any questions you have.
Are there questions for either Ms. Turpin or Dr. Wood? Vice Mayor, you are muted.
Now I'm not, so
There
thanks.
you are.
David, if my numbers are correct by what you were showing on the 0 to 5 year olds, 65% are in single parent, 15% are raised by grandparents. That leaves 20% that have a father, mother figure at home. That is scary.
It is. We have, younger families are disproportionately poor in our society, and they're struggling. I think it's not unique to Johnson City. And as a pediatrician, we see this all the time. Families are really struggling. So I think those are some of the things that we can grapple with as a city. How do we support those families? Actually, ultimately, how do we prevent them or support them before they become single parent families? So that might be part of it.
Yeah, thank you.
Are there other questions? I'm sorry, Julia. Sorry.
No, I was just going to echo what Dr. Wood was saying. I think it really speaks to the leadership team's decision to focus on that age group. And, and it's important to remember that while certainly it'll help a lot of those children that, I'm sorry, my children are going a little crazy in my hallway, so I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. What it speaks to that, but not only those children that are in very difficult situation, but it's going to help all of the children. So anything we do for 0 to 5 will impact and benefit all 0 to 5 children in our area and young families. So I think that's what's exciting about this work too, just moving forward.
Yeah, just a final comment too. I think, when we were presented, 2 years ago, Pete, at least a year and a half ago, when Dr. Hale came over, Kim Hale from ETSU in early childhood development, and Lottie Ryans with First Tennessee Development District presented the EDI project to us. We saw such a need and merit in helping with that project. And now the data's back. And this is a great opportunity now to marry the Child Friendly City initiatives to take and look at that data and then use other data that is available, and to be kind of the arms to help perhaps with some interventions in some of these areas that we possibly see a difference. So Dr. Wood and Ms. Turpin, thank you two so much. I mean, you have just, this is not your job. You are volunteering doing this, and you've really done a superb job putting together the framework and the quality people who are serving on the leadership team to make this happen. So thank you again. It's going to be exciting. And then another thanks to Phil Penzola, who installs a mural that we didn't know was going to be the perfect place to represent Child Friendly City. So with the 3 children, it's great. Thank you.
Thank you all. Mr. Peterson, what's up next?
The next order of business is a discussion on an ordinance to amend Title 8, Chapter 4 of the Code of the City of Johnson City, which would adjust the privilege tax applied to establishments that sell liquor in the city limits of Johnson City. I'll go ahead and read the caption as the draft is put together now. An ordinance to revise, update, and add new sections to the Code of the City of Johnson City regarding privilege tax by amending Title 8, Chapter 4 of the Code of the City of Johnson City, Tennessee, and repealing all ordinances and parts of ordinances in conflict herewith. The way that Ms. Sandos has structured this, it reads that during the event of a statewide pandemic which exceeds 12 months in continual duration, as identified by the governor through executive orders, and where the state has issued guidance encouraging a reduction in seating capacity of restaurants during said pandemic, the seating capacity of restaurants subject to the tax levy pursuant to this ordinance shall be assessed at the rate of the seating capacity immediately preceding said restaurant's current seating capacity. So what this does is it would apply only to restaurants, and the privilege tax is based on the number of seats that they submit to the state of Tennessee, certifying that they have that level of seating in their business. And those are broken down in 4 or 5 different classes with a different fee required for different seating levels. This ordinance would then allow them or require them to pay an amount equal to the classification immediate below what their seating capacity is.
Has the 12 months already been met?
It has not.
When would it be met?
Middle of March. I don't remember. It was the 17th, 19th, 23rd,
Okay.
somewhere in there. I think is where the governor declared the pandemic. So if the taxes are due the end of the calendar year, so the way this is structured, there would not be a rebate for calendar year 20. The reduction realized would occur based on calendar year 21. And that's assuming that the current pandemic extends past the middle of March.
Are there questions for Mr. Peterson?
I asked this in the our agenda review on Monday, but this only applies to 2021, the calendar year 2021.
It would apply to any year in which the governor declared a pandemic exceeding 12 months in continual duration, and through his executive orders encouraged or required restaurants to reduce their normal seating capacity. So it would apply to any year that all of those conditions were met.
Okay.
So the short answer is hopefully yes. Hopefully only 2021.
Well, my question should have been, it is going forward. There's nothing in 2020 because we weren't in a 12-month state of emergency throughout 2020.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions, Commissioners Hunter or Murphy, or action?
I'm assuming, since they're really, even with what has been recommended by the governor, there was no enforcement of that, nor is there any system in place for accountability that this is exactly how it did impact us. These are the number of customers that we had, and this is X amount less than what we had the capacity for. So this would just be their reporting of that information.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll make a motion to approve.
There's a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I will second.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. We have a motion and a second. Is there further question or deliberation?
Mayor, if
yes, sir.
I need to consult with the city recorder. There's not an ordinance number assigned to this. Do you have the master log of ordinance numbers that get assigned so that we could duly note in the minutes that ordinance number, whatever it shall be, is approved?
Mr. Peterson, while you're looking that up, it also, the ordinance document reflects 3 readings.
That's correct. It will take 3 readings.
Okay, so we're going to revisit this, even though it's in the other section of the business of our agenda. It's a 1, 2, and 3 reading.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry, Ms. Jennings.
Yeah, no, I do not maintain that log, and the item as advertised was to consider for discussion. This is not, as I understand, advertised for first reading of the ordinance.
So this is to approve it going forward so we can vote at our next meeting as a first reading of an ordinance.
As I understand it, yes.
I mean, do we even need to vote if it was for?
No, I mean, I
We've
guess,
had,
yeah.
yeah,
This is the discussion item, Pete. Is that what you understand, that it's considered for discussion?
That's the way it's written in the agenda. Yes.
Yes.
So this would be the opportunity to ask, is there anything that you want changed in it?
Commissioners.
My understanding when we were doing this was that we were going to do a 50% decrease in fee and not just drop down to the level below.
The tweak there was the majority of this tax is calculated on entities that the assessed tax is not calculated on occupancy. And so a lot of the entities subject to it, whether they could seat 50 or 500, pay the same fee regardless. And so the ordinance as it's drafted now is more specifically focused on those who might have been at 100, but if they're complying with our public health notices, have reduced that number. And so that was the rationale behind asking for that change.
So just
Question
move forward to our next meeting as an ordinance then?
Yeah.
I believe that would be what would happen next. Ms. Jennings, were you trying to ask a question?
I just had a question. I have sales tax data available, which we can't share by entity. So we have the data to be able to report the sorts of declines that were experienced during the past 12 months, so to say. If you want for some of that data to be mined, understanding I can't report it by entity, that's available. So I just wanted to put that out there in case you want some generic data for a particular segment.
My final comment on this, since it's discussion, is I do have concern that, so many businesses were hurt by a downturn in the business because of COVID. And I know this one is specific to their occupancy being restricted. But I just have concern that we are, isolating this group for assistance when others, either may come to us for that as well, or not feel like it's fair. So that's just a comment.
And I guess I would just suggest, I don't view this as assistance. I view this as aligning our fee structure to reflect the occupancy. And that's why that's why I asked that we not look at that 50% number, because for a whole bunch of these people, occupancy wasn't a factor in calculating their rate of taxation. But for some, occupancy is, and the ones for whom it is are generally, at least as I think through the list of them that I'm aware of, small, locally owned places who admittedly have been hit hard, and there have been means of assistance. What I'm suggesting, though, is not a means of assistance. It's a means of reflecting more accurately that the tax they are being levied is calculated to reflect the reality of their occupancy. With that said, that's two sides of the same coin, two ways of looking at it. Are there modifications to the ordinance that need to be made? I believe that was one of Mr. Peterson's questions before we take it up as a real ordinance on first reading. And that would be what we would be doing at the next meeting. Is that right, Mr. Peterson?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Hearing none, I'm assuming we will proceed as written. And your next order of business is to consider revisions to the HR policy number 156 regarding employee residency. In your packet is some background information which contains the current residency policy as well as a proposed new residency policy. This again goes back to trying to enhance our ability to recruit new employees. And Mr. Willis is still on the phone. He can address some of the recruitment challenges. Additionally, I think you were sent a list of what other communities are doing in terms of requiring residency by certain positions in the city. Kingsport and Johnson City are the only cities we surveyed that have an extensive residency requirement. What is currently in place is that the manager, the assistant managers, the finance director, the fire chief, the police chief, planning director, public works director, and the water sewer director all are required to live in the city limits. The proposed policy change would affect the manager and the assistant or deputy city manager and would require them to live in Johnson City or the contiguous counties to Washington County. All the other positions would not require residency within the city. The logic behind that is there are definitely qualified candidates for those positions that live within Washington County or the contiguous counties. And I give you an example to maybe put this in perspective. We have employees who live in the city of Elizabethton that are closer to City Hall than people that live in Boones Creek that are in the city limits. So does it really make any sense to handcuff yourself in recruitment when you've got a qualified candidate that lives in close proximity, but they don't live within the city or within Washington County? Again, I'm gonna toss this over to Mr. Willis and Steve, if you kind of put your perspective on this, please, sir.
Well, I think, Pete, in my mind, it's simply removing a barrier to recruitment. There are so many things out there that we can't control, that we face each and every day when we're trying to attract and retain employees. This is one that we can control. And as Charlie's research reflected, and I appreciate Mr. Stahl working on this from the outset, just us in Kingsport have restrictive policies. So we're really handcuffing ourselves. And when you look at the 9 positions that Mr. Peterson outlined, not including Pete, Bob, and Charlie, I think 5 of those directors qualify for full retirement today. So we could easily be in a recruitment mode at any point in time. So from my perspective, any barrier that we can remove, we should remove it.
Mr. Willis, how many of our current employees live outside of the 5 contiguous counties?
I would say less than 10%.
Yeah, because that would be a long way to drive to work.
It certainly would. We do have a handful of folks from Western North Carolina and Southwest Virginia, but very few.
You may be aware that some recent legislation was filed in Nashville to remove residency requirements from all public safety employees across the state. So it's picking up steam that we may need to relook at these. It's a different world today.
It certainly is. And I completely understand when the city put this policy in place, probably in the 80s, I would imagine. Perhaps it was a product of people not being able to respond as quickly as what was preferred because the infrastructure wasn't there. But to Mr. Peterson's point, I live in Unicoi County and I can beat our front parking lot in about 13 minutes. You can't drive from North Rome to City Hall in 13 minutes.
Now, would this a policy be specific to people who already reside within those contiguous counties? Or if you went and hired an assistant city manager from Nebraska, where they're going to move to East Tennessee one way or another, can you somehow craft this? So if you're moving to East Tennessee, we want you inside the city limits. Is that?
Yes, and that is how it's written. Charlie, you correct me if I'm wrong, but the 5 contiguous county distinction would only apply to folks who are currently residing there that we might wish to employ.
Is that correct, Mr. Stahl?
Yes, that was the intent of the policy, that if you were recruited from outside the contiguous counties, you would be expected to live within the city and had given 1 year to do it. And yes, that was the intent. It is the intent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other questions for staff?
I would just say, Mr. Willis, thanks for being on tonight and being a part of it, and for Mr. Stahl and Mr. Peterson to, get us some of the information of comparative data. I think the policy is well written. And, I appreciate the fact that this, along with some other things, we're really starting to implement the strategic plan and in recruitment and retaining and looking at things with fresh eyes to update and figure out how we can make those kinds of changes. And so, thank you for, the work that y'all put in and the thought process that has gone into it.
And this isn't ready for a vote either, right? So we were just discussing this. We'll vote on this in 2 weeks.
This
I'm
is
just
ready
kidding.
for a vote.
I'm kidding, Pete. Is there a motion to modify the policy?
Make a motion.
I'll
Commissioner
second.
Murphy and a second from Commissioner Brock. If there's not objection, will we call the roll, please?
Commissioner Brock,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Mayor Wise.
Yes.
Thank you, commissioners. I think with a couple of the actions you've taken tonight, you're going to make Mr. Willis's life much easier, and you will result in an environment that will be much more attractive to recruiting new employees.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Willis.
Yes,
What's
sir.
up next?
The next item on there is a discussion of the existing de-annexation policy. We wanted to, you had asked some questions about that, and we wanted to come forward this evening and just limit our discussion to the current policy in place and the logic behind it, and to answer any questions that you may have. So Preston, if you would kind of walk us through the de-annexation policy as it currently is, please, sir.
Yes, sir. I'll be happy to. I've got a presentation I'm going to share. Here we go.
While you're getting ready to do that, Preston, can I just say the original de-annexation policy became a point of conversation when I was still on the Planning Commission several years ago. And it was really an effort to position the city. The concern was there was a de-annexation that we took up in, correct me if I'm wrong, Pete, was it like 2015 perhaps? Pete's chair cannot, Pete's empty chair cannot answer that question, sorry. And I think it was taken up at the time under circumstances that expedited that conversation. And so we adopted the de-annexation policy so that we would have some criteria rather than just responding willy-nilly to those things. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Mitchell.
No, I appreciate that lead in, because that's exactly where I'm going to pick up. And you adopted this in July of 18. And I arrived in November of 18. So yes, I had to educate myself on this. And what you did was you came up with 6 criteria. And what I've got on the screen there on the left is a screenshot of the policy. It's a 2-page policy, so I've got just 2 slides. And on the left is a screenshot of the policy, and on the right is just a simplification of what's being stated. You have location-based criteria, three of those, and then 3 policy-based criteria. The 3 location-based criteria are if, and again, when you're asking yourselves these questions, this is about is or should this property be de-annexed? Does it border the city limits? Is it within the planning region boundary? So I'm going to stop there and go to the next slide and show you what that means. So there on the screen, you've got a simple GIS map that identifies the what is in this kind of light orange color or peach color is the current city limits, corporate limits. And then what is in this green boundary, the green boundary is your planning region boundary. So quick 101 on the planning region boundary. That was discussed most recently as part of your last appointment to the Regional Planning Commission, finding a resident within Washington County, but out of the corporate limits, but within the planning region boundary. That's an area where we extend our comprehensive planning as well as the subdivision regulations. Subregs extend into that area for subdivision platting, but not the zoning code. And so that's the other. So those are the 2 questions in terms of is it within or pardon me, does it border existing city limits? Is it within the planning region boundary? And then the 3rd location is it adjacent to a city maintained roadway? So then you get into your policy-based criteria. Has it benefited from a materials agreement? And that's where if you've had a subdivision under construction and water and sewer lines have been laid, and then we have reimbursed a developer through the materials agreement. Has the city defaulted in implementation of plan of services? So if there's been an annexation and there was a plan of, or there has to be a plan of services with that, and then for some reason the city has not extended those municipal services identified in the plan of services within the time promised. And then lastly, was the annexation opposed by the property owner at the time of annexation? So those are your 6 criteria. And based on the way that it is written, all 6 need to, my speaker just did something funny. I hope everybody can still hear me. Based on the way that it is written, all 6 need to pass in order for it to move forward. So I'll go to the next screen and identify. There we go. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I've got strange feedback. Thank you. On the next page are the
Charlie, stop doing that.
On the next page are the procedures that, if the criteria meet, these are the procedures that would come into play. Number 1, and this is what we have practiced, since the policy was adopted, and this is what I had touched base on in conversations with the city manager as well as with the mayor about times that most recently when we've had requests or interest in de-annexation, it has not gone any further than that administrative phone call if the criteria don't all pass. And so it does identify there that number 1, if a property does not meet the criteria listed above, then it shall be ineligible for de-annexation. And I realize shall is typical code language, but this is a policy. But it shall be ineligible for de-annexation, not given further consideration. However, if it does meet the criteria, then it shall be considered eligible and the property owner may submit a request for de-annexation to the planning department. And then what's interesting about this is a little different from our typical ordinance process. Planning staff then brings the ordinance to you for first reading. And if you adopt it on first reading, it is construed as initiation of de-annexation by the city. And then you push it back to the planning commission. Planning commission makes a recommendation, and then it would come back to you for second and third reading. So that's if all the criteria are met. And then the last two bullets there is that regardless of really what this policy says, final discretion rests with the city commission. I think that's understood. And then lastly, I think this is maybe just a catch-all for Ms. Jennings and Mr. Wilson, that the city is authorized to continue to levy and collect back taxes prior to any de-annexation. But that's the process. And then I'll go back to show you the location and policy-based criteria. And I will leave that up on the screen if you'd like, or I can unshare, and happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions for Mr. Mitchell on the policy?
I guess I'm curious, are there other cities that have a policy like this? And you may not have looked into that, I don't know.
I have not looked into that. I would be happy to do so.
Can I address that briefly, Mr. Mitchell?
Absolutely, Mayor.
The likelihood is, I would suspect not, because this de-annexation policy was created in response to a very specific de-annexation that the city agreed to under circumstances that we did not want to see repeated.
It's highly unusual that cities consider and honor requests for de-annexation. Those are very, very few and far between.
And I think the reason for that is, outside of having had a precedent for one de-annexation, most cities would be like, de-annexation? Are you kidding me? We would never de-annex anything. Would be their policy.
Is this something though that was created due to a state level? I mean, is this something that applies at the state level, or just us specifically? I can't remember.
No, this is local to us here.
Okay.
The state does have specific criteria in place for how to go about in contracting your corporate limits, but that language is really built into this.
I do think it's a little odd that it would come to the city commission, and then if we approve, it gets sent back to the planning commission, because they're going to know what the city commission's going to do anyway. So why we're sending it back to the planning commission and then it come back for 3 readings, I don't know the value add in that.
I would agree with that comment for sure.
Since you're changing the corporate boundaries, if it's passed, that is a land use and a potentially a zoning and issue. So all of those things come under the purview of the planning commission. And the way this is structured, if I remember correctly, Preston, the planning commission cannot initiate a de-annexation. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's different than a rezoning.
So we have to do it first before
that. What's interesting is that, and I'd be happy to do further research on this, is that in my preliminary research for annexation, not de-annexation, but for annexation, is that I don't know if it's mandatory or if it's an option, but there are other communities that will For annexation, they will bring it to the city commission for a resolution. Basically, that's where the highest body in the community, obviously the body that is also over the municipal budget and the one that levies taxes, considers it first and issues a resolution supporting or not supporting an annexation, and then that resolution is sent back to the planning commission for recommendation before any ordinance comes forward. I do agree that it is a little odd that you would actually hear it for the first time, or you would actually approve an ordinance on first reading and then send it to the planning commission. If the planning commission recommended against it, you could obviously go against the planning commission, continue down that path. But switching gears midstream would cause you to start over. If you handled it as a resolution first and then did all three ordinances together like you normally do, that would make a little more sense.
I guess one question I would have is, at times people annex a property with the intent to sell because that's a benefit for most people or a desirable thing. Is there room to look at this to say, maybe there's another question, or another caveat of, if the property has been sold within X many of, or if the property has been annexed within X many days and sold within this many days, the new owner, do they have the right to look at the annexation? I mean, obviously we, don't see that a lot, but to me, that would be one thing where, the seller might be looking at that as something that would increase the number of buyers, but the buyer may love the property, but the piece about whether it's in the city or the county may be irrelevant or unimportant or actually a deterrent for them. Just as a question.
Are there other questions or comments to the policy or of staff?
Am I on mute?
No, you're there.
Okay.
We heard everything. Yeah.
So I guess my thought is there room for an update to this with respect to those type of transactions? Or is there some sort of risk in that?
I think we are safer keeping it as it is.
Pete, is there, and we know while we're reviewing this, we have a request to consider helping a new property owner with a piece of property. Is there anything that could be done from a zoning standpoint that could provide the person who purchased this and the property had only been annexed for a short period of time, the uses that he wants for the property? If it were to be de-annexed, he would use that property the way he wants to anyway. But is there anything creatively through zoning that would allow him to have those uses and he stay in the city?
Well, I don't recall the details of the request, but this being a large tract, it qualifies to be Greenbelt property, whether it's in the city or not within the city. So the Greenbelt status is available whichever. You can get an agricultural zoning within the city limits, which would allow you to raise animals, to grow gardens or traditional farming. You could do hay fields, You know, all the agricultural zoning pretty much lets you do any kind of agricultural use you wanted to do. And then with the greenbelt status, then obviously you get the reduced taxes with that designation.
One of the points mentioned in that public input, and Preston, you may know, you may not off the top of your head, but does that allow, does the A1 allow the use of firearms in the city?
So zoning does not cover open burning or use of firearms. Those are municipal code restrictions. So zoning is going to be strictly your land use, how you can use your land. Can it be farmed? What other types of land use activities?
And what are the considerations or thoughts of partial de-annexation? So with this being a large tract of land, does this consider that, or is it all or none kind of situation?
Help me with.
So, you know, I mean, if you've got
this,
I'm sorry.
Oh, I just help me understand what you mean by this. This meaning does the policy help it or hurt it, or?
I mean, does the policy address it? I guess. I mean, in any form or fashion, or is there need to look at, you know, because that's something that was also considered, was partial de-annexation. Would that?
So the policy will guide regardless of whether he or any property, forgive me, decides to subdivide. I guess since it was brought up, if this was, if what we've been talking about, you know, if a portion of it was to be cut off, theoretically, yes, you could de-annex a portion and not de-annex a portion. The zoning down to the A1, because it's currently residential, the zoning down to the A1 will allow for those land uses that Mr. Peterson mentioned. Treats the property more like a farm, allows for those kind of more traditional county, rural bucolic activities. The consideration, I guess, from a planning side, which is linked heavily to these annexations, is that this property falls, the property that was discussed before, falls well within the planning region boundary. So I think that for any property, no matter what property is being discussed, not having been a part of the original conversation, but now having studied and understand your 6 criteria, it makes sense why you have the 6 criteria. One, it is logical to suggest that property that is on the outer fringes of the city be potentially available for de-annexation. But it also makes sense that property that is well within the planning region boundary be considered very carefully before that gets de-annexed. And then, is it adjacent to a city maintained roadway? And then the other 3, which really come into play more if development has occurred, that being the first 2 policy, materials agreement, and whether or not there's been a default on the plan of services. You know, those are if developments come in. And then the 3rd one, whether or not annexation was opposed by the original owner. Those are all very, I mean, those are solid policy questions that should be considered, because as the city is growing and services are being extended, there's a cost to the extension of those services. And so I certainly understand that it is a very difficult conversation.
If I may intervene for a moment to answer the question about the discharge of firearms. I think the question came up about the potential of discharging a firearm to put down an animal. Discharge of a firearm is allowed upon written permission from the Board of Commissioners or in use of a shotgun loaded with shells containing number 2 shot or smaller, as long as the point of discharge is not in or upon any street or public place or within 110 yards thereof, nor within 110 yards of any building in the city. So if someone is raising animals and need to put an animal down, they could, through permission of the Board of Commissioners, discharge a firearm for that purpose.
Great. No, thanks, Pete.
Yes, sir.
Mayor?
Are there any other questions? My microphone battery is periodically telling me its battery's about to go dead. So Vice Mayor Fowler, be ready. Are there other questions about the de-annexation policy?
So with open burn as well, is that the same, or would that be something that you would need approval from, fire chief or commission, or is that allowable in any form?
The fire chief is charged with controlling open burning, and in the county, usually handled by the Forest Service and the state of Tennessee. Most of the time, the county has an open burn ban, as well as when we do, especially going into this time of the year with the winds and fall of the year with the leaves and the winds, that there's a ban, an open burning ban in place throughout Washington County. So it would be by special approval by the fire chief. Now, just not to take too deep a dive in the weeds here, but here's what's going to happen if you start making special exceptions. Every contractor in Washington County wants to burn their excess materials on the construction site. And if you start making exceptions, we will get many, many requests to allow them to burn construction debris on site. And that could be in a new neighborhood with no one occupying houses, or that could be in the middle of the ridges on the new lot that hasn't been built upon yet. So that can get really problematic when people start doing construction debris burning in existing neighborhoods. So I just throw that out there for an FYI. The other thing about the open burning, we're not real well equipped to deal with large brush fires. All of our trucks are big trucks. They're big, heavy trucks, and we can fight a fire as long as we can stay on the street. But when we start having to go out into open fields and wooded areas, we are really thin and really dependent on some of the volunteer units to come in with some of their smaller equipment to fight those fires. So those two reasons are the logic behind why we made the decision not to allow open burning in the city.
And it's worth noting that contiguous, the de-annexation, what we're talking about is something that's currently in the city attached to something else that's in the city, that if we de-annexed it and they were doing open burning, they're going to be doing open burning in the backyard of someone who lives in the city who's going to be probably none too thrilled to have that happening 300 yards off the back of their house. So are there other questions about the de-annexation policy, or are we okay to move forward?
We're good.
All right. Thank you. I asked to add an item to the agenda. A little over a month ago, we received back the report from Benjamin Lauterbach on his efforts to review the complaint formally filed against our city manager. And at the time we received that report and shared it with, pretty quickly after we got it, shared it with the public in an effort to shine light on that and be fully transparent. And at the time we were reacting to that information. And I think the commitment we made was that we would take up that information in the context of Mr. Peterson's performance review. And I think it became apparent to me over the last month that that would be a disservice both to the original complaint and more so to Mr. Peterson's performance review, because it was going to set up a dynamic where his performance review was a response to the complaint as opposed to an evaluation of several years of performance. And so upon further reflection and consultation, I have circulated to you a draft memo for your review that you have all seen. And I am suggesting, and I guess recommending to you, that we as a commission take action to document our response to that complaint, separate from Mr. Peterson's review, to deal with that more, I think, responsibly. You all have seen it, and so I would welcome questions or comments at this point, and I'll open up the floor for your comments.
I'll speak first, I guess. You know, I understand that line of thinking, and you know, the review is a more holistic approach to their overall performance of Mr. Peterson, and I do have concerns that, you know, that could overshadow, you know, the entire work of Mr. Peterson as far as what we're trying to contemplate holistically. So, you know, I'm in agreement to kind of separate those two for sure. And
Commissioners Murphy or Brock, Vice Mayor?
Well, I absolutely agree with this approach, and also with this letter, which would go into Mr. Peterson's file. It's time to get this resolved and to move on. We have so much work in front of us right now that we need closure, and I am ready for that.
Thank you.
I'm on board with the recommendation.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
I am also. So I agree with everything Commissioner Brock said.
All right. Is there a motion to approve submitting that memo as circulated to Mr. Peterson and to his file?
I move to change this from a draft into a permanent letter and give to Mr. Peterson.
Right. And there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. And Ms. Jennings, I have sent you a copy of the memo because I would imagine you're sitting there wondering how you're supposed to record minutes on something you don't have.
I'm wondering if we don't need to back up and add this, make a motion to add this to the agenda for consideration first.
My apologies. I thought I had done that at the beginning of the meeting, but I don't think we actually
We didn't
did the
vote on it.
motion.
We didn't take action.
Is there a motion to add this to the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Murphy. Let's call the roll on adding that to the agenda.
Commissioner Brock,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Mayor Wise.
Yes,
Sorry.
ma'am.
Just didn't want.
No,
you to
that's good. Now, we still had a
procedures.
motion on the table to approve the submission of the memo and a second. If there's not further discussion, can we call the roll for it as well?
Yes. So going back, we had a motion by Commissioner Brock, a second by Commissioner Hunter. So Commissioner Brock,
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy,
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler, Vice Mayor Fowler.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I didn't mean to demote you.
You're fine.
Mayor Wise,
Yes.
thank you.
So I thank you all for that. And with that, we can then move on to the performance review as a more holistic exercise, looking at overall questions of performance. We are moving toward the time of public input during our meeting. And so we may have folks that have joined us in the green room, so to speak. And so as we get ready to do that, it's very important for those who are calling in to recognize that the meeting you are watching is operating on a fairly significant delay. And so before you start talking to your phone, it is critical that you turn whatever audio that you're listening to off, or it creates a vicious feedback loop, and we can't hear you and you won't hear much. And so turn the audio off when you're getting ready to join us. The public comment period is intended for citizens and stakeholders to speak to the commission. It is not about items that are not currently on our meeting agenda. And so we've carved out a few basic rules that should be appearing on your screen. And just to read those for those who may benefit from that, there is a 3-minute time limit, and time will be called at 3 minutes. No profanity or inappropriate remarks. Restrict matters to city business that impact the community. Citizen comments only. Because it's not an agenda item, the commission is not likely to deliberate or directly respond to comments tonight. We're here to listen. And then if you have interest in addressing the commission at future meetings, you can find more about that at the city's website, johnsoncitytn.org/public input. And so with those comments made, Ms. Graham, do we have anybody waiting to address public input?
We have 3 waiting, and I will enter them in as they came in order, if you don't mind.
All right. Now, as they join us, well, go ahead and let them come in, and then I'll give the instructions as they go. Caller, we welcome you to the public input section of the Johnson City Commission meeting. If you would please, before you begin your remarks, give your name and your address, and your 3 minutes will start then.
My name is Tavia Stillman, and I am a Washington County resident. I work in Johnson City, and I am the president of the NAACP of Johnson City and Washington County. When we first moved here, we were under the impression that Johnson City was much more diverse than it is. It appeared to be. And although there are 7% of African Americans in the city right now, this is a fight that we cannot do on our own. I'm talking about the Equity and Equality Board that is a direct result of the unrest of 2020. We took to the streets because of national unrest, because we didn't want our city to go down the same path. We would like to see the development and implementation of this board, because everyone has a right to be able to speak their opinions, to feel inclusive, and to be heard. Right now, as one person, it is hard to get your voice heard. But when we come together as a group and everyone is accountable, we can move mountains. So I implore you to not only just think about this, but to actually act on it. Let's not drag our feet. Let's go ahead and develop this. If the name is offensive to some, then let's look at changing the name. But we need to come together as a city so that all people can be heard, so that all people can grow, and so that Johnson City can be put on the map nationally, just not for economic development, and just not for the college, but for our inclusiveness and our diversity and the discrimination that has been taking place in other places. It won't be so in Johnson City. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Ms. Graham, do we have someone else ready to speak?
Yes, just a minute.
Caller, welcome to the Johnson City Commission meeting public comment. We would at this point ask you to give your name and your address, and then address your remarks to the commission.
This is Jody Jones, 315 West Locust Street. Good evening, commissioners, and thank you for hearing me tonight. I'm here to support the creation of the Community Equity Advisory Council. From your comments at the workshop, I got the sense that you all understand the need for such a council or a commensurate activity and are ready to get down to brass tacks. And I thank you for that. This is a growth area for our city, and so of course, it's stirring up a lot of energy and engagement, which is a real opportunity. We should all proceed with curiosity and an openness to possibility. I trust your leadership in setting that tone. I love Johnson City for 100 reasons, but what I love the most is feeling that I can make a difference. And I think that's not just me, but lots of Johnson Cityans have pride in their agency to shape this town. Think about all the groups with a common concern that have rallied for their cause, the neighborhood coming together to save a historic property, downtown business leaders organizing to create a festival, a group of developers have connecting their interests to develop land. Who empowers these groups? The city. City can legitimize and cultivate the civic power of a group of Johnson Cityans in a way that, well, makes them feel more Johnson Cityan. It's to our city's advantage to do so. My favorite writers, Eric Liu, says, there is overwhelming evidence that diverse groups figure out how to cooperate, outperform, and outlast those who don't. He says that during the toughest times, our nation put muscle behind its stated creative equality. It gave outsiders a piece of the action, not just materially, but also politically. And it was this sharing of power that enabled this society to adapt, evolve, and thrive compared to contemporary rivals. Inclusion made our society's power structure more legitimate, which made our society stronger. There are lots of ways to create equity in Johnson City, but the Advisory Council is the way that this group has rallied to do it. You should empower that group, cooperate with them to develop the implementation process and deliverables, work together on the assessment, co-create it. In doing so, you'll weave a strengthening thread through the fabric of our community, and more people will experience one of the best parts about being a Johnson Cityan. I truly believe you all are the people to do this important work. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Ms. Graham, do we have another waiting in the green room?
Yes, we have two. I'll send the next one in.
Okay. Caller, I welcome you to the Johnson City Commission and the open public comment time. You may want to turn the audio down on whatever device you're watching the meeting because there is a delay. At this point, if you'll give your name and your address and then address your comments to the commission, please.
Good evening. Thank you for permitting me to share some thoughts with you. My name is Edward Wolf. Many of you know I live in Jonesboro, Tennessee. I am also the treasurer of the local branch of the NAACP, and I am a retired ordained pastor. I am a heterosexual white male. I'm also a recovering misogynist, recovering homophobic, and a recovering racist. I strongly recommend that the Johnson City Commission create an equity, equality, and inclusionary advisory board. And I say this with no desire, hope, or qualification to be on it. I believe when such a committee is established, the insight of the Johnson City Commission would ensure that adults are placed on the committee. After all, the marginalized in this community are filled with mature, wise, and informed adults. Personally, I need a committee of this nature. My recovery is not complete. Being a heterosexual white male with sufficient economic security, I am at the center of the culture. Being in that position, I am not in a position to sense the needs of those who are marginalized, whether they be African American, Latinx, Asian, Native American, gay, women, or poor. I need to, quote, sit at their feet, unquote, and listen to their needs and challenges, along with the demeaning and abusive actions that they experience every day. Furthermore, such actions erode any hope and or desire to improve their living conditions so that they might become an even more effective and contributive part of our culture and community. As a heterosexual white male, I was aghast at the comments made during the January 21st Commission workshop. To me, the comments were racist in tone and indicated a desire for white males to remain in power. My perception is that this community is not accepting of the marginalized as reflected by data from and experience of them. What I also saw was white privilege and white supremacy in action. Finally, as an ordained minister, I embrace the earliest comments from Scripture. God said, "Let us make humanity in our image," and God blessed them. There were no qualifications. We are all equal, deserving equity, and moving our region forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Graham. Do we have another
Have one more.
person waiting? All right. If you'll let them in.
Qualifications.
We'll welcome you to the public comment section of the City Commission meeting. You'll want to turn your audio down because there is a delay. And at this point, if you'll give your name and address, and then address your comments to the commission, please.
Okay, my name is Lana Norwood. And did you say my address, like my home address?
That's correct. Yes, please.
Okay, all right. My name is Alana Norwood. My residence is 1616 Strawberry Lane within the Johnson City limits. And I would like to share my piece as a young activist and the secretary for the Washington County Johnson City branch of the NAACP. And as an activist and a young person and a resident, hearing some of the comments made by the commissioners at the last workshop at the end of January, it was concerning, it was disheartening, and microaggressive to say the very least. I think that we need to be very intentional with the way that our elected officials speak on behalf of matters that are involving racial issues. As we know, our city experienced protests and direct action following protests with our city officials. And so to almost make light of those events that took place over several months felt very disrespectful and racist, quite frankly. I believe as a Black woman, or rather as a biracial woman living in Johnson City, that we need to be very intentional with not only with what we say, but also with who we are choosing to represent us in our city. So yes, the city may be made up of more white people by percentage, but that does not negate the fact that there are still people of color that are being marginalized and discriminated against. And it definitely doesn't negate the fact that there are poor white folks that are also being marginalized. So I believe that this Equity and Inclusion Board would be very beneficial to the city in moving forward in what we would like to say, you know, a motion of progress towards a more inclusive city. You know, the numbers that were thrown around, if I'm remembering correctly, the satisfaction rate was a little under half. So that means less, you know, almost half of the city isn't satisfied with our inclusivity. And I think that we should take that very seriously, especially given the protests that took place this summer and the conversations that happened afterwards. I do want to thank the people that put together this proposal and, you know, had the courage to speak up and continue the conversation. So I would like to challenge the commission to reconsider this proposal very seriously. And, you know, I can only encourage a vote yes to this proposal. I think a lot of residents would be very happy to see this push forward towards equity and inclusion in Johnson City. And I think as a whole, other cities could look to us and say, wow, we should be doing something like that too. So I think that it's time for us to raise the bar. And that's my piece.
Thank you. Ms. Graham, do we have anyone else waiting to address the commission?
No, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. The public input section of our meeting is now closed. Mr. Peterson, is there anything before we come to the time of adjournment? You are muted.
Sorry. There's nothing else to report. Staff and I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Commissioners, Commissioner Brock, anything to add?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hunter?
No, sir.
Commissioner Murphy?
Nope.
Vice Mayor?
I know it's late, but I will be brief. We have had the Haven of Mercy at the front page of the paper, and I just wanted to say a couple of things. One, Grant Lockley that runs the Haven is an unbelievably giving person. He has a servant's heart, and he's been doing what he can to help the less fortunate in our city for years. And he inherited a building that's 100 years old and has added on to it. And as people have come in and told him what is wrong with that building, he has been trying to correct it. He doesn't always have the money at the time to do some of the things that were needed, but he has made do with what he can and has worked hard. I went through last Saturday and toured the building and looked at some of the things he's done, and he has been working hard to try and change everything that he was told he needed to change. And I just think it was really a bad timing thing. I know, you know, there's never a good time to find things that are bad in a building, and just the middle of winter is really not the time to send 60 to 90 people back outside onto the streets. So if we need to move them somewhere temporarily, that is what needs to be done. And I understand what's been done, but I think we should also do whatever we can to help him get this building up to code where people can live there. He would like to move his facility to the Ducey property on South Roan. He's been looking at that for a while. He's been working on funding, and so he still has a servant's heart. He has never done anything to try and hurt anyone and only tried to help. I mean, feeding people 3 times a day and housing people that are less fortunate. So if we can help in any way, please do. So whatever you can do, whatever the community can do to come together and help him, I know he would appreciate it. And I feel like he's been downtrodden by some of the things that were said and by the paper, and he has never meant anything but good for the people he's trying to help. So I just wanted to put that in tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. If there are no further comments, the meeting can stand adjourned.